travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Fruited Stars Podcast third season. My loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is an amazing episode because Dan Jurgens boards the mothership to discuss Batman First Night from DC Comics. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Jurgens. Thank you so much for the Fruited Stars Podcast.
Good to be here.
So we start off with a question of inspirations. What inspired your love for comics and who your earliest influences?
Love of Comics was first inspired by the 1966 Batman TV show. Prior to that, I hadn't even seen comic books. I got hooked on the show, and I was a kid, so I took it quite seriously, not like it was camp. Well, walking through the neighborhood one night, there were a couple of kids who were older than me, and they were sitting on a stoop, looking at these things that turned out to be comics. And lo and behold, Batman and Robin were in these comics. And then as soon as I realized that I could get more than my weekly dose of Batman on TV, I started drifting toward comics, and it all just kind of got ignited right there.
So the interesting about Batman, 'cause I know we're about to talk about Batman First Night, is that Batman seems to be so adaptive for any genre, any style, from, as we're going to talk about, the noir of the 30s and 40s to the camp of the 60s to going back to fantasy with him, with stories. Why do you think Batman is so flexible in so many different ways, styles, and takes?
Well, I think part of it is because he doesn't have superpowers. And because of that, that means you can fit him very comfortably into a low-level story. Like if you were going to do a story about Superman, say, fighting the mob, or a villain like Two-Face, or even the Joker, you might get a story here and there that works, but by and large, it becomes a kind of a hard fit. It just doesn't match up well. So with that in mind, I think the trick with Batman is he kind of fits into that milieu quite well. But then again, because of his accomplishments as an inventor, as a detective, as someone who is able to look into the future kind of and anticipate what's coming and make these marvelous weapons, or as the Joker said in the 89 movie, where does he get his marvelous toys? It means he can adapt to the higher level stories like the Justice League stuff as well.
So you're writing Batman First Night, or you completed your three-issue run on Batman the First Night, which is a Black Label comic. When you were approaching the idea for Batman First Night, what stylistically were you thinking about? Were you thinking about bringing back to his roots of the 1930s specifically? Was it just bringing him back to basics of his power set and his characters?
I think the answer would be all above. So if one of the things that has happened, I think there comes a point where it has come a point where Batman has probably gotten a little too powerful, a little too smart, a little too knowledgeable, a little too capable. And to me, he's almost like hyper Batman or super Batman, something like that. And I like Batman more when he has to function on his own. And I have always been captivated by those very early stories in which there is Batman and there is Commissioner Gordon. There is no Alfred. There is no Batcave at that point, no Robin, none of the accoutrements that he would later come to have. And so I'm just more fascinated by a Batman, I think, that has to get by on instincts and guile and street smarts and his own physical capabilities in a time where there are no computers and there are no easy technological solutions to these things. To me, Batman is always something of a loner. But really, over recent years, it has kind of turned into Team Batman. And here's his army of Robins and his army of Batgirls and just all these characters around him that take away from that aspect of it's Batman alone against the world. So I did want to go back to that. I also find the entire atmosphere of 1939, the late 30s into the 40s, fascinating because of the worldwide depression, the results of World War I some years earlier as we stood on the cusp of World War II. So I think it just made for a very fascinating time.
Now, when you're thinking about the character of Batman and the world you're creating for him in Batman First Night, as you mentioned, the Great Depression is active in the 30s. Like I said, we escaped World War One. We're about, you mentioned a couple times Hitler starting up in Germany in the 30s. How does, in your opinion, does that impact Batman's worldview, or at least Bruce Wayne's worldview? Maybe not Batman's, let's say Bruce Wayne's worldview, and the city of Gotham around him.
I think Bruce is quite able to recognize evil when it's staring him in the face. That sounds very simple, right? But we see time and time again, and have seen through history, that people don't always recognize evil when it's staring them in the face. He is capable of that. I think because a lot of that is because of his own tragic past. In addition, what I mixed into it is this idea of Commissioner Gordon having been a World War One hero. So he is also able to bring a bit of a worldview to it that doesn't stand out so much in all the issues, but it's definitely there. And I would also add this, that certainly America has wrestled with aspects of prejudice and racism throughout its history. I think most countries have. And that was also a particularly acute time that was, I think, brought to fore by what was happening in Germany. So all of that mixes together. And I think, Bruce being able to look past some of that prejudice and racism,
Hmm.
and we see that he very clearly is there to help others. I think that's what helps build him as a hero without him having to hit anyone in the process.
Well, I think one thing that was very interesting is that there's several scenes where you discuss the anti-Semitism going on in the 30s, especially with the backdrop of Hitler going to Germany. You have a character, Rabbi Jacob Cohen,
Mhm.
that Batman interacts with as well. How important was it to insert that part of the reality of that time period and his interaction with the rabbi into this series and time period?
Well, I think it was absolutely essential. And because one of the decisions that Mike Perkins and I made is this idea that I wanted this to be a rabbi rather than just a Jewish individual business person down the street, mother, whatever, because I wanted to get into an aspect of what is it that makes Batman, how best to phrase it? Um, well, let's get to all heroes a little bit when I say this. To a certain extent, I think to be a hero, you have to have some aspect of faith. I don't necessarily mean religious faith, but it borders on that. You have to believe there's something better around the corner and a better world that you can build. So I'm fascinated a little bit by this notion of heroes and faith, and that way I do mean it in the religious sense. And there's a scene in the book where Rabbi Cohen asks Batman if he's a man of faith. Then Batman basically says, no, I can't be. You can't have grown up the way I did and seen what I did and still essentially believe there is a God. I think that goes to Batman's personality a little bit, but it also then gives Cohen a bit of a role in not Batman just helping him, but also him helping Batman. And that's the kind of relationship I wanted to build there.
Um, the suggestion then is that Batman is Jewish. Is that correct?
I didn't necessarily make that suggestion. I clearly what I was trying to do is build in the idea that Batman is non-judgmental and tolerant about whatever faith someone might have.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say that I was building in the idea that Batman is Jewish, in part because he does pretty much say, no, I can't believe in a God when I saw my parents gunned down in front of me.
Hmm.
So with that in mind, no, I'm not saying that. I am trying to paint Bruce as an extremely tolerant and non-judgmental and non-prejudicial person.
I think it's like I said, I think it's a fascinating concept, as you mentioned, the idea of faith, especially in terms of Batman. As you said, he doesn't believe in God. Um, but the other part is, as you mentioned, he is someone who's fighting evil regularly. Something that he's, as you said, fighting for the good of. Is it is he being completely honest when he said he doesn't believe that there is then goodness in that sense, and there's then definitely an evil, which you kind of connects directly to a faith idea at that point.
I think he thinks he's being honest. But to answer your question specifically, no, I don't think he's being honest. I think that in this story, we should also add that Bruce is fairly young here. I would say Bruce is probably 24, 25 years old. I think, like many of us at that age, he is probably still working through a lot of these thoughts
Hmm.
and where it might take him. He may think he's come to conclusions, but again, like many of us who have gone well beyond the age of 25, we do change our minds and opinions. So I think your question was a very perceptive one. Was he being honest? He thinks so. But ultimately, I don't, it's this question of can you really believe in the idea of making a better world if you don't believe in this notion of human potential and the guidelines that are in place from a number of different sources, be they be a variety of different religions or governments
Hmm.
that sort of exist to help that out.
And I think the other thing I wonder about does Bruce Wayne struggle is as far as the Great Depression, people are suffering financially extreme to an extreme extent that we've never seen in history at that point. Bruce Wayne is at this time period, I don't know, he would be considered a high millionaire or billionaire at this point because money was obsolete. If you're worth several hundred million, you're close to what we consider billionaire. He didn't necessarily earn that money. He got it from being born. How does he feel towards his own wealth when he's surrounded by such poverty around him?
Um, I don't think that, as I portrayed Bruce here, that he has nearly the kind of financial resources that we have come to see later. I would say at that point, and granted, it's a lot of money now, and certainly was even more money then. If Bruce was a millionaire, he would say worth 5 million. Not like a gobby 100 millionaire or anything else. That I think it was a more practical level. I think he can look at it very comfortably this way and say, I am using this as a means to an end and a greater good. And if the Wayne wealth uh, sort of finances Batman's mission, and out of that lives are saved, that's an appropriate use of the money.
I'm actually, it's okay if I use a quote from one of your comics and in my next question, if you don't mind.
Sure, please. Yeah.
All right. So Jim Gordon tells Bruce Wayne, I really like this line. Officially, I could never countenance such behavior, but with a force full of men who are on the take, will I be thrilled to find a cop who's so inclined? So that's kind of his argument for trusting Batman. Now,
Yeah.
is it a belief in what Batman can be, or is it desperation that someone is maybe on his side?
Both. So Jim Gordon at that point, and this is where, and I, I talked to Mike and the editorial team about this. Boy, I wish this was 6 issues long. I could use the page count because I would have loved to explore the corruption of the Gotham City police force a little more. And we really did indicate that in the first issue, right from the very start, when Gordon walks in and he finds the decapitated body, and the cops are laughing about it, and also when a woman comes around, talks about the cops coming around looking for a freebie. I mean, we clearly paint the idea that this is not a squeaky clean police force by any means.
Hmm.
In fact, it was very representative of what we saw in police forces in the 20s and 30s. So I think what Batman offers is that sense of relief, that it's someone to help. He had clearly demonstrated by that point that, yes, he was on Gordon's side. The other thing is this, by virtue of wearing a mask, while it might look strange in the beginning, it's pretty hard to go find and corrupt someone if you don't know who they really are.
Hmm.
And Gordon doesn't even know at this point that money would have no effect on Batman because he doesn't know who it is. But at the same time, I do think we pretty much made it clear that in a lot of respects, Gordon is there to clean things up. And he's got a couple of cops on his side, but not many. And that's so Batman certainly aids in that mission.
Now, you also have Bruce Wayne trusting Jim Gordon because of Jim Gordon's relationship with his own parents. That I believe that is referenced there. Is
Yes.
he then just taken on faith that whoever his father would be friends with is inherently then a good person? Is that just assuming his father then can only have been good?
I think there's a little bit of that, but I would also say if Bruce was somewhere between the ages of, say, 8 and 10, when his parents were gunned down, that it's reasonable to assume, if Jim Gordon had come over for dinner one night or even just stopped in to visit, that once he left, Bruce might have heard his parents say, "That's a good guy right there," and thank God we finally have someone we can trust in the police force. Of course, he wouldn't have been commissioner at that time, but I think there's every reason to expect that, yes, Bruce certainly trusts the opinion of his parents. And in this case, if it's thumbs up for Jim Gordon, that's a part of it.
Now, it's been pretty clear why Bruce Wayne becomes a hero. As we know,
Mhm.
it's a famous story, everyone knows it. Is there an explanation on why Jim Gordon is a hero? Is he just inherently good, or is there something else about him that we know made him a hero like Batman is on his own side?
Well, certainly, I think there have been different stories in the past that have touched on that with Jim Gordon. My own feeling in this particular story, and this is very much why we made sure to connect Gordon to World War One, is that in that war, Gordon saw the horror of war and also was exposed to the difference between good and evil, however you want to portray it. It wasn't necessarily as clean in World War One as World War Two, but it was still there.
Hmm.
And so I think because of that, it has contributed to just having that right sensibility that if you go too far down this road of corruption or have governments that accept a level of corruption, that you don't dig your way out.
Hmm.
It only gets worse from there. And so, and again, this is where, in only 348-page issues, you can't get to everyone's background in depth. But that's why we wanted to get the stuff we did out there in terms of Jim Gordon, and also point out that it is those experiences um, that clearly contributed to his effectiveness
Hmm.
towards the end of the story when they took care of the monsters in Gotham.
And I think another, as you mentioned, by having Batman not have Alfred, it does put a lot of weight on Batman or Bruce Wayne's shoulders to make good decisions. You have him questioning the use of the gun where he is tempted to do so. You do have other issues for him about killing, things of that nature. I mean, the people that he's fighting are on the edge of being alive and dead, where this kind of it's debatable whether or not he's technically killing them or not because they are technically alive at those moments. How does that put that added pressure on Bruce by not having someone like Alfred to keep him in line? He's now forced to keep himself in line and be his own moral compass.
Right. And again, I think that gets back to what I was talking about earlier with um, this idea that in many respects, if you look at the original trappings around Batman, of which there were none for the most part,
Hmm.
it is kind of him against the world. And these are for, 1938, 1939, some dark stories. But it really, those stories really do set Batman up in a very interesting point because he is having to decide this stuff on his own. He is having to make a judgment between what is right
Hmm.
and what is wrong. And it puts him in the position of, with no one to police him, him still walking that right path, whereas so many cops in Gotham do not.
And I think that's a fascinating idea because it does demonstrate Bruce Wayne is. I think there's a tendency in the comic books to just assume Batman is just sort of like Superman, inherently just good. He just is. And I think this is
Hmm.
a good way of showing that he's still a man who has to ask himself what is good and what is not. And I think that's sometimes missing. I feel like in the Batman mythos sometimes.
I agree with that. And especially since, once again, you go back to those early stories, and everyone is sort of fascinated with the idea of Batman carrying the gun, and which he did. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to broach that topic. But even in his first story in Detective 27, he finds the bad guy, punches him, and knocks him into a vat of chemicals, which kill him. Now, the railing behind him did give way. So you can say, was that intentional? No, it probably wasn't.
Hmm.
Was it still some kind of case of manslaughter? Yes. So Batman did kill and didn't really, and obviously didn't seem to feel too bad about it. So I think with Batman, That is, again, from the very first 10 pages, just like with Superman, what makes him those two different from each other. And yeah, I like very much then the idea of putting Bruce in that situation.
Now, when he's dealing with those, without giving too much away, those people that are, like I said, on the verge of life and death, is
Mhm.
what he does then technically killing them, or because they were already on the verge of death, it doesn't count, as it were?
I did touch on that in the story, and it is because really they were kind of the not quite zombies, but certainly had been brought to the brink of death and went beyond. And we did make it clear there was no cure for that affliction, that they were going to die anyway. So I look at it and say, no, he's not guilty of murder in those cases.
Now, the protagonist in these issues is a character called the Voice. I'm not going into detail what he turns out to be. We won't keep that spoiler. What is unique about you think the Voice as a protagonist, antagonist for Batman?
I think what's unique about it is because, again, you go back to that time, Batman's villains typically didn't have superpowers or anything else, and they weren't necessarily extraordinarily special people. They tended to be people with evil motive. They tended to be mad scientist types, things like that. So I mixed a little bit of those two together. But in this case, I did want someone who was going to simply be smart about how he did it, communicating by radio so no one really knew who he was, kind of hiding in the background a little bit to get Gotham to where he wanted it, where he could consider it his, but also doing it while preparing for the coming war. That he was going to position, everybody could sort of anticipate what was coming. He did in a grand scheme that kind of said, and how will I use it to profit me? So that's, I think, again, is fitting with a lot of what we saw with Batman villains at the time and does fit with what we might expect a villain to be in 1939.
But yeah, I was wondering if because the 30s is the era of radio over television. Radio, you had the radio serials and stuff like that. Was there an intentional connection with making The Voice and having be connected to the time of radio?
Yes, definitely.
So once again, I know you did. You only did we only have the three issues. Is there potential for a four, five, and six of the Batman First Night?
Uh, I would like there to be. Mike Perkins and I have been talking about it. We have a story that we would like to go on to with a follow-up. So we shall see. I really do believe there's a lot to explore here. Uh, I'm fascinated by this notion, even within those first stories, that Batman was introducing Julie Madison as his fiance, things like that.
Hmm.
And so I say, there's a lot that we have here. The times are really interesting. It puts Gotham City in this very unique place. So yeah, let's see if there's more to explore and play with it.
As far as you know, is there whispers that they will continue with it, or that's definitely an unknown?
We don't have 100% assurance, but I would think that if we went to them and said, here's the story, I think they would probably go for it.
What's next for you?
For me right now, so one of the things I'm doing, I don't know, let's see, to what extent this will even show up, but
Oh wow. No, it shows up.
yeah,
Definitely shows up.
yeah, okay, well, very good. This is going to be the cover for the Panini Germany edition of the first issue, which Mike Perkins is inking. I'm also working on the second cover right now. And that'll be fun. That will have a couple of different sort of covers on that,
Hmm.
and Mike is inking those. And I think then beyond that, I just wrapped up a Spider-Man story that will be appearing in Marvel Spider-Man project within probably about 6 weeks. We have a 0 Hour, which I wrote and drew way back when, 30th anniversary special that's going to be coming out again in about a month, I believe. I think at the end of September. So that's what's coming up next. We're just putting the finishing touches on those, and then starting on what will likely be a Superman project before long. So that's where we're at.
So just two questions about that, and I got you. We're almost at year 30, and I promise. Far as the 0 Hour special, is that these new stories from within 0 Hour, or these just a reissuing?
No, this is a new story that Ron Mars and I came up with. We were talking about it one day and realized that, yeah, this is the 30th anniversary of Zero Hour, as well as Kyle Rayner becoming Green Lantern and
Hmm.
Hal Jordan becoming Parallax. So we put all of that into a new story. It's an 80-page special that is going to be coming out from DC with new story and art that goes back to kind of the atmosphere of that time and Zero Hour, with a lot of great artists working on it. We have, Kelly Jones doing kind of a Gotham City sequence. Daryl Banks, who did the first Parallax, I'm sorry, Parallax and Kyle Rayner stories, is one of the artists on board. Tom Grinberg is doing a section. Jerry Ordway is doing a section, and I am as well. Gosh, am I forgetting anyone? I'm sure I am. So yeah, that's what we have going on right now in terms of just kind of something that people can read if they just want to go, yeah, I remember that. I love that back at that time.
Well, I'm gonna be one of those guys. As I brag every so often on my show, I'm a huge Green Lantern fan. I have every Green Lantern comic book going back to 1960. Kyle Rayner's
Mhm.
a character, so I was actually a huge fan of what was going on with Zero Hour and Kyle Rayner. So I'm looking forward to this. That's very exciting.
Awesome. Good. I'm glad to hear it. Like I said, that's going to be out within the next, I think it's the end of September, so won't be long.
That the same time we're going to release a new Superman comic. Is that going to be within the ongoing series, or this will be a mini series?
It's probably going to be more of a standalone project, but that's way into next year. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, Mr. Jurgens, it's been an absolute honor to speak with you, sir. If you ever want to come back to talk about the Zero book, that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much.
my pleasure, Jeff. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Spirited Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Please return for the next episode when Derek Ting boards the mothership to discuss Agent Recon. To next voyage, travel on.